I've always had a fascination for understanding how people think and what drives them to certain actions and patterns. As a result, I've made a habit of taking any chance I can get to understand how it was those who came before us navigated the world of society. How did they choose their friends? How did they deal with their enemies? How did they traverse the ever-treacherous world of society in which an errant word could see their position overthrown, or even their head removed from their shoulders? For all of our technological progress, for all of our societal gains, the abolishment of slavery, the end of feudalism, the dismantling of colonialism, depending on who you ask. We humans are still just as primitive and tribal as we've always been. We've just become particularly proficient at the power games we play with each other as we jockey for position in our relevant social hierarchies. To that end, I wanted to explore how my personal interest in these particular quirks of human behavior and societal trends as a whole could translate into maintaining a career in the games industry. The following presentation is more intended for those who have made it, so to speak, rather than it is for those who are trying to break in. So bear that in mind as we proceed. This advice assumes you've already gotten the nod, and someone has signed you onto their team. Preservation, not admittance, is the name of this game. Despite my lack of personal experience in this field, it turns out that almost more than any other field short of politics, entertainment industries are chock full of all sorts of drama, rivalries, petty jealousies, and other social landmines. If I and others, like me, are to enter this sort of world and survive, we will need to be prepared for what awaits us, as the battles do not cease just because we've gotten through the door. Which brings me to this. A surprisingly potent book called The 48 Laws of Power by Robert Greene. Having listened to this text cover to cover in audiobook form, I can say with certainty that there is much within this work that will be of use to myself and my peers when it comes to maintaining a career in this nascent industry. With the slew of mass firings in recent months, and the industry's notorious reputation for taking bright-eyed new meat, chewing them up, and then disposing of the leftovers when they're done, it's more important than ever to understand what it is that makes the people we will collaborate with tick, as they will quite literally decide on a whim whether our careers live or die. There are 4 laws in particular from the 48 that I suspect will be of use to us. They are: Law number 1, never outshine the master. Law number 19, know who you're dealing with. Do not offend the wrong person. Law number 11, learn to keep people dependent on you. And law number 13, when asking for help, appeal to self-interest, not mercy or gratitude. With this established, we will move on to the first, and arguably most important law when it comes to preserving one's position in an industry rife with egos. Law number 1, never outshine the master. If there's the simple way to sum up this law, law number 1, never outshine the master, it is this quote from Demetri Martin. A know-it-all is a person who knows everything except for how annoying he is. So what exactly do I mean when I say, do not outshine the master? Who is the master? You are no one's slave, after all. Hopefully. Well, it's actually quite simple. The master is your boss. Perhaps your direct superior, perhaps the superior of your direct superior, perhaps even a person who has the ear of your direct superior. But at the end of the day, the master is a person you answer to, in one way or another. So the trick is this. You must always make your master feel comfortably superior to you. Be cautious when attempting to show off what you can do and accomplish. Envy is a powerful and dangerous force, especially where one's career is concerned. Instead of impressing your superior, you have the chance to make them feel envious of your abilities and make them fear that you intend to replace them. Their self-interest therefore demands that they either suppress you or even outright destroy you. Become aware of what your master is capable of, what they take pride in, and what their insecurities are. Once done, restrain your brilliance in these areas, so that you do not offend their vanity and sense of self-worth. Instead, work with your master to gain from their experience and, at the same time, flatter their vanity. An excellent alternative to showing your brilliance would be to ingratiate yourself. Seek their advice on subjects you know them to be knowledgeable about, even if they don't fully interest you, or even if you have a solid grasp of the concept already. The wide majority of masters dearly enjoy, even if they don't outwardly admit it, to teaching others of their knowledge, if for no other reason than to validate their own self-importance. Play upon this desire to strengthen your position in their eyes. They are less likely to view you as a threat if you are voluntarily taking on the task of an unofficial protege, rather than a potential rival. There is, however, an important caveat to this. Pay attention to the state of your master's position. If the master is in slow decline and is on their way out, do not be concerned with outshining them, especially if you want to replace them, as this will hasten their fall from grace, and their ability to directly suppress or harm you during this time period will be limited. If the master is in free fall and is rapidly going to be gone in short order, ignore them. Do not twist the knife. Such behavior is often looked upon poorly by others, and rightfully so, and it may cause you future problems with whomever becomes your new master. Although this law was relatively short and sweet, its importance cannot be understated. Pay very close attention to this law above all others, if nothing else. Its value is incomprehensible. With that said, let's move on to the next law. Know who you're dealing with. Do not offend the wrong person. There are many different kinds of people, not all of them reasonable. In fact, some of them are outright dangerous to associate with. If offended or threatened by your presence or ability, these sorts of people will seek vengeance of a sort, even if they are not in an official position of superiority. In this way, this law reflects our previous law about outshining masters, yet now we turn to those who may be of equivalent or even inferior status to you. Learn to analyze what sort of people you are dealing with, especially in a close-knit industry such as ours, where an errant word from a disgruntled foe could spell great trouble for your future prospects. It should be noted, before we proceed of course, that not everyone can be sorted into these categories, and in fact, a large number of people are of a perfectly reasonable sort. But it only takes one influential enemy to bring your reputation, and with it your future prospects, tumbling down into ruin. With that in mind, here are the 4 particular types of people to be especially wary of. Number 1, the arrogant and prideful person. A staple of the entertainment world, where fame and fortune are won swiftly. They may often be able to disguise their nature, but there are telltale signs that give away their identity as this sort of person. They have a touchy pride that makes them exceptionally dangerous. Much like an offended master who is jealous of your ability, any offense to this person's pride will lead to an overwhelmingly violent response. There is no sanity behind this retaliation, nor is there any scene upon which they will excuse your error, whether it is a casual setting or even a wine-infused celebration. If at any point in your dealings with a person you sense an oversensitive or overacting pride, flee as swiftly as you can without arousing their fury. Whatever you're hoping to gain from this person is not worth the cost you may potentially pay in the future. Get out while you still can. The second type of person is the hopelessly insecure person. They are related to the first type in that they have a very touchy pride, and their egos are extremely fragile, but as a result of their nature, they are more difficult to spot. Their sense of self-worth is very, very insecure. If they feel you have deceived or attacked them in some fashion, your injury will simmer, and they will seek vengeance. Their method of retaliation isn't to use a great bombastic assault, but to nibble at you in ever-increasing severity until the wounds their bites cause become impossible to ignore. Death by 1,000 cuts is a way to describe it, although each cut is ever more slightly damaging as time goes on, and by the time you realize you are under attack, it may be too late for you to compensate for the damage they are doing. The only effective method of dealing with this sort of person is to disappear from their influence. Withdraw from their presence and interact with them in as minimal a fashion as you are able, vanishing entirely from their sphere of influence if possible. Eventually, someone else will rouse their ire and they will switch targets. You can still get something out of this type of person, but you must step very lightly. The third type of person is a Mr. Suspicion, a paranoid delusional. Strongly compared to Joseph Stalin of the Soviet Union, one of its most famous examples, Mr. Suspicion sees what they want to see, assuming that anyone and everyone wants to take what they have and is jealous of their own possessions and fame. They will almost universally assume the worst intentions from an action. In truth, they are actually the least dangerous of all four types we will discuss, and this is due to them being genuinely unbalanced as a result of their delusions and paranoia, seeing shadows where there are none, despite their insistence to the contrary, which in turn means their attention can be diverted from you without too much difficulty. Even so, if you do not respect the danger of such a figure, or you are not able to further deceive them into switching to a different target, you will find your days to be numbered if you are anywhere within their sphere of influence. The fourth and final type of person is the serpent with a long memory. They are the sort of hybrid between the first two types of dangerous people. If hurt by your actions, they will show no anger on the surface, much in the same way the hopelessly insecure person does not want to make their ire clear until it is too late. Yet their method of retaliation is far more akin to the arrogant and prideful person. This sort of person will almost always be a person of lesser standing than yourself. They do not strike out at you because they know they cannot hurt you, yet. However, if their fortune should change and they find themselves able to wound you, they will do so without hesitation. You must recognize these people by their calculating nature and cold-blooded shrewdness. And if knowingly in their presence, do not be overly dismissive towards them. They are a patient sort of person, and they will wait as long as necessary to exact their revenge. The best way to avoid ever rousing these sorts of people towards you is to treat all you meet with dignity, even if they aren't worth your time, as it will lessen the possibility of uncovering such a snake who will seek to wound you in the future. Law number 11. Learn to keep people dependent on you. In an industry as cutthroat and merciless as ours tends to be, in order to maintain your position, you must ensure that you are always wanted and needed. The more you are relied on, the more flexibility you have. If you position yourself in such a way that your fate and the fate of those you work with is intertwined, and you're able to learn whatever skills are necessary, you can make yourself indispensable. A specialist, inflexibly capable of only one task, can be easily replaced with another specialist, notwithstanding the caveat of those who do work so specialized there aren't enough of you to go around on the market. It is worth noting, of course, that a generalist who has no specialty and isn't particularly impressive at anything is also equally vulnerable. This is particularly important to keep in mind when it concerns studios that have relatively few members and are not so flush with resources that retraining your replacement is something they can do on a whim, especially if you fill multiple functions within the group. Make your removal from the team as unpleasant a consequence as possible, not by how you'll react to such a decision, but rather by what they'll lose should they choose to part ways with you. The status quo is a powerful force, and when people become comfortable with what is, it is unlikely to change unless absolutely necessary. A perfect example to hit home as to why this law is so important to adhere to was an infamous case 4 years ago in America, in which the Disney Corporation replaced a bunch of their IT workers at Disneyland with foreign immigrants who were less expensive. As further humiliation, one of the terms of their severance package was a requirement to train the new workers. The few of them who were of more uses than just their initial purpose ended up getting shifted to other parts of the company. Some of those who were no longer necessary, to this day, still do not have a new job. For an example that will hit closer to home, we should remember the case of Telltale Games, where only a handful of employees were tapped to remain on the project following the studio-wide termination and shuttering following poor management decisions. The only ones who remained with a job were, as you may have already guessed, the only ones absolutely necessary to finish the project. Although it may feel briefly insidious to think about these things in such a way, consider that when it comes to the person deciding who gets the pink slip, they aren't going to have any qualms about who needs to go, or at the very least, they're not going to be able to afford to have any, and they will certainly be taking these sorts of factors into their calculation. Consider it from their perspective. The budget demands a person be fired. Who are you going to choose? The person who does precisely what they've been hired to do? Or the one who has volunteered to take on numerous additional tasks that may require multiple people to be hired to fill in the void they leave behind? Or better yet, someone who fulfills a function so absolutely necessary that their removal is simply impractical. One warning to bear in mind when it comes to entrenching yourself within the structure in such a manner is that your superior may not always be grateful for what you do. In fact, they may even come to resent and fear you. This is a variation of outshining the master that we've discussed previously, and it is a natural potential consequence of securing your position in this way. If your superior ever starts becoming resistant to your attempts to take on additional duties, or even begins to forcibly remove you from certain aspects in which you've previously entrenched yourself, take a hint. They may not be trying to remove you outright at this moment, but they are trying to put you back on the list of people they can remove, should they need to do so in the future. In cases like this, you may even want to start looking up vacancies elsewhere, or even reaching out quietly to other prospective employers in the event you need an exit strategy. Even if such actions ultimately prove innocuous on the part of your superior, complacency can often prove fatal to your career. This in turn brings us to the final law we will be discussing in this presentation. When you are asking for help, never appeal to mercy or gratitude. Always appeal to self-interest. Do not appeal to someone's generosity, to any friendship you may have with them, and especially do not appeal to their gratitude for things you have done for them in the past. This last point is particularly important due to how most perceive the feeling of obligation. It may pay off in the short run when you compel them via such methods, but many will see such forms of persuasion as a burden, one they would happily ignore if such is possible. They will often find a convenient reason or excuse as to why they simply cannot help you at this point in time. To further your chances of success with whatever you are seeking, whether it's in the realm of gaining employment, securing funding, or even a simpler request for assistance on a project, such as animation work, sound work, or etc., find a way to sweeten the pot. Search out what the person you wish the assistance of is seeking. Is it validation, connections, or perhaps a more direct and blunt profit margin? Whatever this turns out to be, emphasize it as the primary motivation for assisting you. Do not become trapped in the delusion of your own needs, and especially do not presume that your needs matter to others, even to those you may be on good terms with. Assuming that your own needs matter to the person to whom you are appealing will prove fatal for your cause. Rejection is all but inevitable, should you do so, as regardless of what they may claim, a large majority of people are pragmatic at heart. Regardless of personal disposition, political beliefs, or even a lack of familiarity, almost all people who have something worth seeking, whether it be expertise, connections, or funding, have something they are interested in obtaining. Self-interest is a universal language that bypasses histories, cultures, and personalities. Appeal to this directly, rather than some nebulous thing like friendship. Do not be subtle about this. You have something they want, whether it's an opportunity to better their reputation from being attached to your project, a special technique they've wanted to learn from you that you'll expose them to if they agree, or even a direct increase to their profit margins due to some aspect of your project that aligns with their business endeavors. This is where prior research comes into play, especially if you are not already familiar with the person in question. Read up on them. Dredge through their social media profiles before making the approach. Learn what motivates them and what they may or may not appreciate. As has been stated before, knowledge is power, and to walk into a precious negotiation without it is to seal your fate. There are rare instances, however, where these direct appeals to self-interest may be seen as crass and unpleasant depending on the person you're dealing with. This is actually frequent with those who are significant enough that there's simply nothing you could offer them. Instead, in cases like these, the opposite is advised, and you should most certainly make an appeal to their mercy or charity. These sorts of people oftentimes are vain and are usually seeking validation in the form of satisfaction from having given assistance to someone who would otherwise be beneath them. Once more, knowledge proves to be the powerful tool. These are but a few pieces of useful knowledge about human behavior that I've unearthed from my research. This book, 48 Laws of Power, is, as far as I'm concerned, a masterpiece of psychological analysis when it comes to humans and their interactions with each other. For all of its moral and ethical deficiencies, and there are quite a few of them, as I'm certain you picked up on during my presentation, every honest analysis I made of the industry, and of life in general, came back with the sobering realization that, for as uncomfortable as the laws contained herein, the truth of their claims, no matter how poisonously cynical they might seem, never fails to play out as expected. Ignoring these laws due to the moral quandaries they raise is at best the act of a naive sucker whom life will more than happily disabuse of their optimism. All I can hope is that you've learned something from my presentation that will help you in the future, in much the same way that my perception of human relationships was significantly enlightened when I first picked up the 48 Laws of Power.